Okay, folks, I want to welcome you to the next in our teleseminar series. This today is going to be the top 10 sales presentation tactics of the top sales pros. First of all, my hat goes off to all of you for being on this call today. Presentation skills are actually one of the biggest things that we get requests for here at Sales Coach International. People feel that the presentation is going to be absolutely key to their success. We need a better pitch, we need a better presentation, we need a stronger value proposition. These are the things that we hear and so forth. One thing I want to say before we get started is that the presentation is merely a part of your sales cycle. It is not the do-all, end-all. It is very important. Obviously, your comfort level of being able to bring across the many features, advantages, and benefits of your product or service to your customers, your prospects, your clients on a regular basis is absolutely paramount. But I do need you to know that there are so many other things in the mastery of this thing that we call selling. The presentation is basically the showtime. That's the time when you get a chance to do your dance. Now, it's an interesting phrase that I'll use there, is doing the dance, and you'll hear me a lot of times in my seminars talk about coming in and doing, JoJo the puppet boy, JoJo the sales guy dance, coming in and doing your pitch, coming in and throwing up on the customer's shoes. We talk about the shortest course on selling. The shortest course on selling, as it relates especially to the presentation, is to ask questions and listen. It's 4 words. To ask questions and listen. To ask questions and listen. Now, you hear things or you see things out there in the marketplace today. Matter of fact, I heard it in a conversation before we even muted everybody out about using a software program called PowerPoint. PowerPoint doesn't allow us necessarily to have a flow to our presentation unless it's the flow that we've decided. Now, one thing that I want to give you as a rule is that, number one, and write this on the front of your handout page, is that the customer is in charge. The customer has the things in their mind that will tell you as to what needs to go into your presentation and things that do not need to go into your presentation. See, what we need to understand and really pay attention to this is that in the profession of selling, it seems that as salespeople, our goal or our objective is the transaction itself or the sale of the product or service. That's what we're there for, is to create the sale. The issue we have here, the challenge that we have, is that the customer's goal is not the same. The customer's goal is not to own your product or service. The customer's goal or their objective is to use your product or service to get something else that they really want, and that's the benefit. The challenge that we have as salespeople is that we want to come in and say what we've got, what we sell. We want to come in and show it. We want to come in and tell it. We want to come in and pitch it. We want to come in and present it. We call that the spray and pray method. We want to put it in a logical format. Logical for who? Well, logical for us. And typically, unless it fits exactly with what the customer's needs are based upon our assumptions, then we have things like pushback, stalls, those mindless stares that we get sometimes. We have objections. We have no's, those things that come up. And a lot of times they're based upon not fully understanding. Why don't they understand? Because we present from our perspective. See, here's the shortest course. The absolute secret to selling. You ready for this? This will make you millions of dollars if you really pay attention and take action on this accordingly. Here it is. Ready? If I put in front of you what you want more than anything, you will move heaven and earth to get it, and you'll pay me a premium. If I put in front of you what you want more than anything, you'll move heaven and earth to get it, and you'll pay me a premium. Now, here's the challenge. Most salespeople put in front of the customer not what they want, but what the salesperson wants, what they want to sell, the way that they sell it, how they want to sell it, when they want to sell it, in the style with which they want to sell it. And unless that matches the customer's needs, desires, or wants, then we have pushback. See, the shortest course on selling is to ask questions and listen. My book called Smart Selling has a subtitle called You Got to Open Them Before You Close Them. Well, it's the same thing with presentations. If we don't open our customers, they don't tell us how to sell them. They don't tell us how they want to buy, and thus we've got to guess. We find that most salespeople do what's called a feature dump. And listen, you can write this down. Feature dumps suck. They suck. I mean, that sounds kind of rude, but it's exactly what happens. We come in and we think, like I said, the shortest course on selling is 4 words, ask questions and listen. Most salespeople think it's 5 words, show up and throw up. Spray and pray. Tell them whatever you got. Bring them down to the solutions you think that they want. Tell them the benefits that you provide. Put it on a slide. Let them read it. Let them read more. Let them look at another one. And hopefully they're going to say, good God, where have you been all my life, and buy from us. Now, we don't know. We know that that's not necessarily the logic of sales. See, what happens with feature dumps, and the reason why we come in and we'll tell, here's what we have, here's who we are, here's how long we've been around, here's what our history is, here's who we do business with, here's how many employees we have, here's how we're listed on the stock exchange, here's blah, 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 blah. The reason we go off through all of this, number one, because it seems logical. It seems logical to say the more reasons that we give them to trust us, the more reasons we give them to believe us, the more reasons that we give them as far as solutions or features to possibly do business with us, the more that we dump on them over our competition, they should buy. It should build value, right? Wrong! It only matters if it matters to them. Second reason why we dump features is, hey, it's easier. Let's face it, it's easier to memorize a list of products, memorize a list of features, memorize a bunch of stuff that matters to us. Take all of our company literature and internalize it. Take our websites and internalize it. Look at our product lists and bring them out and throw brochures in front of them and so forth and say this is why we're better than the competition and quality, service, reliability, and all that crap that comes out of our mouth. It's easier to do that than to come in and actually listen to the customer and try to tie together what our products and services are to what their actual needs are, what their desires are. And the third reason why we tend to feature dump is that, and this sucks too, that's the way we've been trained. We've been trained on PowerPoint. We've been trained to come in and say, here's who we are, here's what we do, here's why you need us, here's why you love us, here's why you'll never leave us, here's why the competition stinks, here's how we don't stink, and all that. We've been trained to do that. Rather than to come in and find out what the customer's true needs are and then tie them back to ours, we've been trained to talk about us. I coach and work with a company out in New York. It's a $1 billion media company. The salespeople out there are 6-figure earners, all of them, and some of them high 6-figure earners. I had initially, for the first couple of years I worked with them, I was under the assumption, because I was only working with management, that the salespeople must be superstars because of the money that they made. What a bad assumption that was. When we started doing a review of what it is that they do, and I'll reference this several times on today's call, we found out that they came in with a PowerPoint presentation printed out in a manual. We called it a hymnal. Please turn your hymnal to page 1. And what was page 1 about? The company. Page 2, the company. Page 3, the company. Page 4, the company. Page 5, the company. Page 6. Did anything in that presentation come down to the customer? Nowhere. Nowhere. It was about, here's how good we are, here's who we are, here's where we are. And then they tried to tie it back into the customer, but it was too late at that point. At that point, they had already shut off the ears and the minds of most people that they were putting their value proposition in front of. Why? Because everybody does that. And I'll get to that in just a minute. Despite the good reasons we may have for bombarding prospects with features and benefits, it's not an effective way of selling. What feature dumping does is it forces the prospect to figure out which one of those features or benefits apply to them. I mean, think about it. Who's in a better position to connect the prospect needs to your product? You or the prospect? If you just throw out a bunch of features and benefits, what it does is it opens the call to performance misinterpretations and a failure to demonstrate just how well suited your offering is for the prospect. If that happens, you get no connection. And that poor connection and the prospect's limited ability to connect their needs with your products is exactly why feature dumping doesn't work. How do you say that in an easier way? Okay? It means if you just come in and say everything you got, you're relying on the customer to do the work of saying this is why I need what you got. And if the customer has to do the work anyway, well then why not send a vending machine? Why not send a website? Why not send a brochure and let them make the decision? The profession of selling is for sales professionals. A sales professional bridges the gap from where a customer is to where they need to be using your product or service. If, and there's a big if in fact it fits. Now, a lot of us have been driving down the road before. I was reading an article by a colleague of mine, Bill Brooks, and he was talking about driving down the road. Sometimes we take a wrong turn, and we end up on the wrong road, and if we continue on that road, we get to a place where we're trying to get to in the first place, which is the no-sale world. Now, think about that in sales. Sometimes you might be presenting a product or presenting a service to your customer. They said, I want the 30-pound blue product, and you're trying to sell them the 60-pound red product. Why? Well, there's a few reasons why. Number one, you didn't ask the right questions to determine what they really wanted. Number two, you didn't listen to what they said, even if you did ask the questions. Number three, you don't have what they want, so you're trying to basically sell what you do have. Number four, there's a contest rewarding what you're trying to sell versus what they want to buy. And number five, there's bigger commissions on that big 60-pound blue product that you're trying to shove down their throat. Now, here's what happens. You're breaking a bunch of cardinal sins of selling. In the first instance, you didn't listen, you didn't ask the right questions, so you were in that tell mode. Telling ain't selling, guys. Telling is not selling. Telling is just throwing up on the customer. And the fact of it is, it'll work for a certain percentage. But if your closing ratio isn't where you want it, I'm going to tell you it's because that percentage is always smaller than if you find out what they want and then give it to them. The second, you didn't listen to what they said, so you tuned out. You were more focused on your need to sell rather than their desire to buy. The third reason where you didn't have what they want, well, you're trying to shove a square peg in a round hole, and that shows a lack of character. And if you got a lack of character, you basically throw yourself in with all those sales hacks out there, the 80% of them that only get 20% of the results. And there's this stop on their career train before they get over to, being the sous chef in some restaurant or something. They're giving sales a shot. If you don't have what they want, you have no damn right to try to sell them something else, unless you can educate them and you honestly feel that they're going to be better suited with the product or service that you have. In that case, it doesn't come down to just trying to sell it to them. It comes down to asking them more questions, so they're the ones that say, well, maybe this is potentially what I need. Then the fourth thing, the contest rewarding the sale. You're trying to shove a different product down because there's a contest. Well, that's just being self-centered, worrying about what you want rather than what they need, and focusing them on the fourth one, which is I'm focusing on the other product because there's a bigger bonus. That's just greed. So those last three show a major lack of character. Okay, and you can't have that in selling. There's too many people that define sales professionals as smarmy or pushy or self-centered or product-focused or commission breath sons of guns. And we can either permeate that through crap like this, or we can do the things that we have to derail those thoughts by showing them the level of professionalism that comes out with solid presentation tactics and strategies. Okay? So let's talk about presentations. Let's talk about why presentations are a problem in sales. Why presentations have challenges. See, you learn I've got to come in here and I have to become a good orator. I have to tell a good story. I have to be interesting. What I'm going to tell you is you don't have to be interesting. Now, you do have to be engaging once you get in this. But stop worrying about being interesting first and telling a good tale, and start focusing on being interested and listening to their tale. So the first reason why presentations are somewhat challenging is that a presentation is a lecture. It's an education. And when you're being lectured to, you don't remember everything that's being told. Now, we like to think we have these wonderful presentations. I spent days and hours creating this PowerPoint with all these fancy slides and all this stuff going on. You think about it. When's the last time you sat through a presentation that had a whole bunch of PowerPoint slides and so forth, where you remembered every damn slide that was there? You remembered all these things because I had the fancy guy jumping up and down in the corner on that slide, or I've got the different colors, or I got the words zooming in from the left or parachuting in from the top. Now, it's fancy and it's nice and it's swell and it's cool, and they say that visuals do add to how much somebody remembers, but the rule is that people only remember about 20% of what they hear. Now, you're listening to a guy who does sales presentations, does seminars, does workshops for a living, and I understand that only 20% of what I say will possibly be retained. Now, of that, how much of which will be acted upon? So I need to tie these messages together, some of the things you're going to hear me talking about today. I need to repeat them over and over and over, some of the things I'm going to talk about today. I need to make them simple, some of the things I'm going to talk about today. Now, you can increase what they remember with some visuals. You can maybe knock that 20% up to 30 or 35%. But still, here's a major problem most people have in presentations. They try to give too much information. And on the other side of that coin, yeah, there's people who give too little information, and then they ask for the close before they've earned the right to do so, and you know who you are out there as well. So just remember, a presentation typically doesn't work that well because it's in lecture format, it's in telling format, it's in throwing up on your shoes format, it's in here's all the information, it's a dump of features format, okay? And you only get 20% of it, and hopefully they remember the 20% that matters to them. The second reason why presentations are not always as effective as you want is that typical presentations have over 80% of the presentation devoted to describing the seller, describing the seller's solutions, the seller's features, the seller's history, the seller's performance, and things like that. All too often, salespeople are dealing with customers who are not sure of the exact nature of their problem or how your products and services impact the other areas of their business. So we need to tie those things together, and we certainly don't do it when we're just in there talking about us. So we're going to talk about the importance here of letting the customer, just because you're sitting in front of them doesn't always mean that they know why they need your product, or if they need your product, or how valuable your product is. Just because they're listening or they've agreed to listen to a presentation doesn't mean, in fact, that they even heard you. Customers can be really impressed with the offering that you're presenting, but often they still lack a compelling understanding of how it applies to their situation, and they don't know why they should buy it, whether they should buy it, or who they should buy it from. And you know who ends up making the sale? Maybe the pushy guy. Maybe the guy who makes it easy to buy. And I'm telling you, smart selling is easier selling because you go in, you listen to the customer, and you find out, or you help them understand why it is that they may need the product or service that you're offering. And you get it all out on the table. You get all the problems, all the pains, all the issues, all the challenges out on the table. And you know what happens when it's all on the table? The answer's in there somewhere, and it becomes evident if you have the ability through a professional presentation to pull everything that's out there on the table as a mess, pull it back into neat little piles in priority and sequence, and then your solution becomes evident. And the third reason why presentations are often difficult and suck is because everybody does it the same way. Everybody comes in and shows up and throws up. Look at it from the customer's perspective. They don't always understand why they need your product. They don't always understand what it can do for them. They don't understand the value of it. And based upon that, it's highly likely that 2/3 or more of the information that they hear from your mouth falls outside of their areas of comprehension. They don't understand it. And when that happens, they go to what they do know. And what they do know, they put into neat little piles, and they stack you up against the competition. And then you start to look and sound and act pretty much the same. And then, what do they understand? Well, here's one. How much it costs. And then you've commoditized yourself. So I got salespeople all over the world saying, man, I got to have a better presentation so it's not always about price. And yet they come in and they run a presentation that pretty much looks and sounds and walks and talks and acts just like everybody else's. Then they may say, well, we've been in business longer, we have more customers, we do this. You know what? That's important to you. Ultimately, sales presentations break down communications between buyers and sellers. And that leads to frustration, that leads to misunderstandings, that leads to conflict, and sometimes that even leads to adversarial relationships between sellers and buyers. All of these things impede your ability to create that cooperative and trust-based relationship with customers. Remember, Selling is a transfer of trust. So write this down. Presentation time is showtime. It's showtime. Everything that you've done up till that presentation, you have earned the right now to get in front of the customer to solve a problem, to create a goal for them, to help them reach where they want to get, to improve their profitability, to improve their productivity, to decrease their risk, to minimize their chances for failure. Everything that you've done, all the calls that you've made, all the emails that you sent, all the cards that you sent, all the networking events that you've attended, all the prospecting, all the voicemails that you've left, all the letters you've sent, all the collateral material you've dropped off, all those referrals you've asked for, everything is culminated in this moment. And presentation time, baby, is showtime. So here's a few facts on the second page on presentations. Number one, I want you to write this in. Sales is an involvement sport. It's an involvement sport. Now, we're going to go deeper into this as we go today. You've got to get the customer involved. You've got to get them invested into making a purchase. You got to understand, a sales presentation is not so you can sell something. Listen to me here. A sales presentation is not designed for you to sell something. It is designed to help the customer buy, to help the customer make the decision to buy. Now, one person on this phone call wants to be sold to, so stop designing your presentations to sell somebody something. You need to get the customer involved. Write this down. The more they're talking, the more they trust you. The more they trust you, the more they're buying. So even shorten it. The more they're talking, the more they're buying. Guys, you know what a presentation looks like? A presentation looks like 75% of you talking and 75% of you listening and 25% you talking. That means the customer's talking 75% at your presentation? Yes. You see, the presentation is only the opportunity to get there to identify how your product can best serve the customer's needs. Who's got those answers? You or them? Now, obviously, you have answers based upon what you bring to the table, but they have the answers based upon how they want to buy it. We have to discover and get our customers, we have to discover their needs by getting them involved. In Martha Rogers' book, One-to-One Selling, she talks about getting the customer invested in the buying process. She talks about if you were to own 100 shares of a stock that at one point was $100 a piece, and now it's $1 a piece, well, you're going to stick around longer than if you only earned one of those shares. You're more invested. It's harder to walk away. So we need to get our customers invested into making a purchase. We need to get them involved in it. We need to get them off the sideline as a participant and get them in the game, which we'll discuss in a moment. The second fact that I want you to write down is that prescription before diagnosis equals malpractice. Prescription before diagnosis equals malpractice. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, imagine you go to your doctor's. You come in, you set an appointment on the phone. You said, "Doctor, I don't know, I'm having some joint pain on my left side. You know, my ankles, my knees, my hips, everything on my left side." He says, "Okay, come in for an appointment on Wednesday at 10 o'clock. And when you come in, he sits you down in a chair, pulls down a screen, opens up a computer, and throws a PowerPoint presentation up there and says, here's what we've discovered. Here's this. Here's how long I've been a doctor. Here's what I've done. Here's how many patients I serve. Here's where I serve. Here's where I have various levels of my practice. Here's my levels of expertise. Here's where I graduated. Here's where I did my residence, and so forth. Now, here's a solution for your pain. You have joint pain. And and that would never happen, because he wouldn't be prescribing the cure unless he could diagnose where the pain was coming from. Customers don't often know what's caused their problem. I'll discuss that in a moment. But there's little disagreement that patients do generally take the medication or undergo the treatment that is recommended by a physician. And there's little differentiation between a professional physician and a well-positioned professional salesperson. What's the commonality? They both ask the right questions and then recommend a solution. If you go in and you try to give them some canned pitch, well, that's based upon what you want to sell, how you want to sell it. And unless it matches perfectly with that small percentage of the customer base that's out there, you find yourself on that no trail, that objection trail, that stall trail. And you know what, guys? That's hard selling. Number 3, write this down and circle it and highlight it. Nobody wants to buy what you're selling. Nobody wants to buy what you're selling. Nobody wants ownership of your product. I don't want to, guys from Formosco that are on the phone, I don't want to own the plants. I want a better looking yard. If I buy from you and I'm a reseller, I don't want to own your products. I want more profits. I need you to ask me what's important to me. I need you to ask and decipher what my experiences have been. I need you to figure out by asking the right questions. I mean, guys, most products and services are not ends unto themselves. More often, they're a means to an end. What they do, your product or service most likely enables your customers to do something that will move them closer to their desired goals and objectives. If you sell advertising, nobody wants to own advertising. They want more profits. Heck, they don't even want the customers. They just want the profits. Nobody wants to own insurance for you insurance folks on the line. They just want the peace of mind. My business, nobody wants to buy and own sales training. Nobody's on this call because they want to be entertained for an hour. You want better results. So nobody wants to buy your product or service. You have to understand that. But everyone, if you help them, will have a better shot of purchasing your product or service if you put it from their perspective and what they get out of it. Number 4, the customer should write your presentation. The customer should write your presentation. Now, I've alluded to this several times thus far on this call. It means we need to ask questions and listen. We need to identify the main benefits that they need, that they will receive by having our product or service. And then we need to focus only on those, not on everything. See, if you ask the right questions and you're willing to listen to the customer, they will actually explain your business to you. They'll tell you what to present and what not to present. They'll tell you what to say, what not to say. They'll tell you where to go, where not to go. They'll tell you what names to drop, like other customers and things, and what names not to drop. They'll tell you what stories to tell and which ones to stay away from. They'll tell you what benefits to focus on and which ones not to focus on. Problem is, we focus on too many benefits, and I'll get into what we need to do, the reason why that's a problem in a bit. Number 5, put a star beside this one. A confused mind always says no. Now, whether that no comes out as an objection, whether that no comes out as a no, whether that no comes out as a stall, whether that no comes out as, well, we got a better deal from somebody else, whether that no comes out as, well, we're gonna see 7 other salespeople and get their proposals, the no comes out in a variety of ways. When there's clarity, there's no reason to have to dance the value proposition in front of 15 other people. When there's clarity, then the solution is evident. The problem is we confuse our customers because we come in with these big, elaborate presentations. We come in and we're speaking primarily about us. 80 to 90% of the time we're focused on the seller, not on the buyer. So use the KISS theory. Keep it simple, stupid. Are you going to want to practice your presentation? No doubt. Does that mean you memorize it so you have to stick with it? Remember that group of guys I was telling you about out there in New York, these 6-figure salespeople? We went through a role practice exercise where I put them all in a room. We put them in front of a video camera. They were going to role practice an actual sales situation with their manager, and I was just the observer. When they walked in the room, I said, okay, guys, let me have what you got there. So I took their laptops, and I took their PowerPoint presentations. I set them off to the side. I said, now listen, that's not what I want to see. I know you can read. What I want to see is how you can read the customer. And guys, I got to tell you, by taking those things away from them, you would think I removed their lungs from their chest. How well would you do without that? So down there where you see my picture at the bottom there where I said, where I'm standing there with the thumbs up, it's funny, you know, as I was preparing this, I just was doodling and I wrote one of those little talking bubbles out of the side of my head. And you know what I wrote there? And feel free to do so yourself. I guess what I'm synopsizing here is that people buy for their own reasons, not yours. People buy for their own reasons, not your reasons. Okay? So we're 30 minutes into this. Let's talk about what the top 10 presentation, and you know what? These can be tactics, but also strategies. This is the way that we're going to look at going in to open the customer. Okay? Number one, I've taken a page from Stephen Covey here today, and I want you to write a number one there. Begin with the end in mind. Start with the end in mind. Say, what's the purpose here? What's the purpose of this call? So I want you to write something else in there. Most important thing for you in a sales presentation, especially if you're going to be up against several competitors, is to be memorable. Okay? So write this question in. What do I want them to remember when I'm gone? What do I want them to remember when I'm gone? What are my key points? What are the key benefits? What are the things that I really need to resonate in their head? Here's a mental exercise I've gone through for years as a sales professional. Every time, and even today, when I'm putting my sales training programs and so forth in front of these large corporations, I've got to go in and I've got to do a presentation. I've got to go in and I've got to lay out our value proposition. I've got to go in and I've got to ask all the stuff that I'm talking about today, I have to do. Okay? But what resonates in my head is that question. What do I want them to remember when I'm gone? What do I want them to remember when I'm gone? What do I want them to remember when I'm gone? Okay? So I feel like this. When I leave that door, now whether I'm dealing with one person or I'm dealing with a room full of decision makers and more of a boardroom type of environment, I always assume that when I wrap it up, I walk out the front door and that the attendee or the attendees, the participants in the meeting, notice I said participants, not the observers, in the meeting, walk out another door. Okay, so I walk out the front door, they walk out the back door. The door that they go out walks into a room, and in that room there are 200 of my biggest prospects, 200 other companies that could hire me, 200 companies that would make a major impact on my career, my company's business, and so forth. So the question I ask myself is, what do I want them talking about? What do I want them saying about me? What do I want to stick out in their mind to such a degree that they have to tell them? So if you start with the end in mind, you have to realize that it's the old 80-20 rule. 80% of what you say, 20% of what you say will create 80% of their interest. 20% of what you say. So it's really important to focus on what you want to come out in that 20%. It's real important to be able to, as they would say in the world of NLP or hypnosis, how you anchor that message so that it's something that you can pull up over and over and over. When you go to Tony Robbins seminars, Tony Robbins really works hard to anchor certain messages. And he does that to physiologically. He'll make a move up on stage that will bring that rush of emotions back. He'll play some music that will bring that rush of emotions back of where he had you at a point when he anchored that emotion or that phrase. So what do you want to anchor in your customers? What are the main things you want them walking away with? And remember this rule. They're going to remember a lot more about them or how they will be using your product or service than they will about you and what it does. So that message needs to tie into them. So here's an exercise for you. Instead of the old feature dump, what I want you to do is, number one, create a list of all your products and services. Secondly, identify the main features of those products. And third, create a list that clarifies just how those products or services and those features that they have meet the customer's highest value needs. So how does it turn into benefits? By matching the prospect needs to the unique features in your product, what you'll do is you'll gain a significant selling advantage. And by showing how those capabilities and advantages of your product are really solutions to their problems, then you start to get a little bit of passion developed in your customers. You start to get them enthusiastic about wanting to buy. So what do you want them to remember when you're gone? What are the main messages? So start thinking, what are my main messages here? And guys, it ain't quality, service, reliability. It's, you know what? I ask these in hundreds of workshops around the country. I say, real quickly, list the 3 main benefits of doing business with your company. And what comes out is quality, service. Everybody says that same stuff. And if they remember the same thing about you than they did about your competition, well, what's the only thing that's going to do to differentiate you? Price. So speak from their perspective. What does quality mean to them? And I'll get into that a little bit further as we go here. Number 2, I want you to write in, preparation equals power. For years and years now in running our coach company, we find that one of the number 1 reasons for failure in the sales process is lack of preparation on the salesperson's part. We go out and we wing it. We go out and it's just, look, I'm going to put you on stage in a Broadway show. I'm going to expect that because I'm paying you, you're going to be well prepared and you're not going to wing it. Well, we say, well, what do you mean wing it? I know my pitch backwards and forwards. I know my presentation. I know what every page on that PowerPoint's going to look like, every slide. I know what, that's not preparation. That's not what I'm talking about. You need to do your homework so that you can seek relevance in the eyes of the customer. You need to Google your customers. You need to prepare better questions. And what do I mean by better? I mean relevant questions, unique questions, questions about the customer's current environment. You need to know what you're getting into before you get there. What do I mean by that? Who's going to be in the room for the presentation? What roles do they play? What personal agendas might they have? What professional concerns might they have? Who's my competition? Who's their competition, and what's that causing them? Heck, you might even think about in advance, what's the room configuration going to look like? What are the expectations of the attendees? What kind of experience do they have with your company, your product, service, your industry? You want to ask 3 questions. These 3 questions I just went through on my coach call a couple weeks ago. These 3 questions are absolutely paramount to build a better presentation. The first question is, and this is the question that you ask yourself as you're preparing for the call. The first question is, what do we know? What do we know? What do we know about this customer? What do we know about their industry? What do we know about who they're up against? Who do we know inside this account? Do they have any experience with our company in the past? What experiences have they had? What are the main buying criteria that this company has? Who's involved in the decision-making? We need to ask all these questions. What do we know? Oftentimes, the larger a company gets, the more feasible it is that the customer has done business with you before. If they haven't done business with you, maybe they've done business with a competitor out there in the marketplace that you might have a relationship with. You need to do a little bit of homework in advance. What do we know? You need to get online. You need to Google them. What do we know? Who's involved? What kind of pending significant events are coming up for this customer? The second question that you ask is, what do we need to know? What do we need to know in order to make a solid presentation? What do we need to know in order to take this deal from end zone to end zone? What do we need to know? Is it things about their credit rating? Is it things about who they're doing business with now? Is it things about when they want to take delivery, where they are in their decision-making process? What do we need to know? Why do we think through these? So that we prepare a better presentation, a presentation that has a lot of questions involved in it, a presentation that seems not contrived rather, but appears to be well thought out and focused on the customer. The third question you want to ask is, what do we want to get out on the table? Now, put a star beside it. What do we need to get out on the table? What do we need to get this customer talking about? What kind of pains might they be experiencing, and how can I tee up questions that will bring that out? What things might they be concerned with or be fearful of, and how can I bring those things out? And every question that you ask needs to be tied directly in to something that's going to come up in your presentation that you add in the form of value. See, if you don't get them saying it first, then when you talk about what you've got, it doesn't have the impact. But once they say, this is my problem, then when you say, this is my cure, it's got a bigger impact. But if they don't know they got a problem, if you don't get them talking about that first, then your presentation falls on deaf ears. So it really takes some homework, guys. Write this down. I want you to run all the what-if scenarios. Okay, what kind of things might you run into? What if they ask this? What will we do? What if the decision maker decides at the last minute that he can't show up? Maybe he can't show up until 20 minutes into the presentation. And incidentally, you know why some of them do that? Because they know the first 20 minutes is going to be mostly about you. Mostly about who you are and where your company is and all your branches and who you're... And they don't want to go through that shit again. They've gone through that with the previous 7 companies that they looked at. The previous 700 salespeople that have come in start there. So what does the decision maker want to come in for? The demonstration and the price. That's what they want to come in for. Run all those what-if scenarios. What if the meeting is cut short? How do you have a power ending statement to make sure you move on to the next meeting? What kind of objections might come up? What happens if somebody no-shows? That's really key in your decision-making process. What if 10 minutes into your presentation somebody says, all right, enough with the fluff here, get me to the bottom line. What's it going to be for me and what's it going to cost? Are you prepared to adjust course? See, a lot of things happen. Imagine that imagine there's 2 ships 100 miles out at sea and they're both going to start heading back towards their port of call. And each one of them has a few degrees variance in their navigation. Well, that happens. You get blown off course a little bit. You get taken off course by a large wave, something like that. Especially when it's left not to an autopilot, but left to a human being. You get blown off course. It's not a matter of if that happens, it's when it's going to happen, in sales especially. It's not a matter of getting blown off course. It's being able to be the captain that's able to adjust their course to get us focused back on where we need to go. How do you do that if you don't run these what-if scenarios? If you don't prepare? If you don't practice? If you aren't engaged 100% before you walk in the door, visualizing what could possibly come up, visualizing all the things that you need to know so that you go in comfortable, you go in confident, and you go in and say, hey, listen, I know that you've probably looked at several other companies, or if so, if not, you probably will, that offer my product or service. So I guess I don't have to tell you about what I do and how it works and so forth. How about we do this? How about we concern ourselves on what you need and what you're looking for? Let me talk about a difference. Let's move on. Tactic number 3. You need to open it the right way. And what do I mean by open it? Open your presentation the right way. You need to seek differentiation right out of the gate. You need to position yourself as different than all the other hacks that are out there. There's an article out there that I read recently by an author named Tom Freeze. And he talks about how he comes in and opens meetings. I found it to be very, very valuable. And I've always used a variety of this for years and taught many salespeople how to come in and open a meeting. Open a meeting so that you disarm the customer. Open a meeting so that you wow them immediately. Open the meeting so that you create differentiation right out of the gate. Too often as salespeople, we assume that just because someone sits through the sales presentation means that they're ready to listen to our ideas. And key decision makers, especially if you're selling large corporate accounts, well, guys, they got a lot of things on their minds, and if you don't do something to secure their attention at the beginning of the presentation, then it doesn't matter how powerful your message is because it falls on deaf ears. Now, in addition to that, buyers are generally skeptical, in which case, as salespeople, we got to inherit all the negative biases that those prospective buyers have formed as a result of having sat through countless presentations, countless PowerPoints, countless feature dumps. So he goes on to say in his article, he says that he always opens the sales presentation in a couple of ways. When he's only dealing with 1 or 2 buyers, a small meeting, he says, I make a point to thank the prospect for their time. He says that, he goes on to say that's not an earth-shattering new strategy, but it's something that's respectful, polite, and quite frankly, differentiates. Because a lot of salespeople come in, it's like, basically, without saying the word, sit down, shut up, hold on, because I'm ready to throw some shit at you. Okay? Next, He says, I summarized by reviewing what brought us to this point. Like, for an example, Terry, we had some initial conversation a couple weeks ago, and based upon your upcoming projects, we thought it would be valuable to sit down and review some solution alternatives. Then he goes on to add, I've done some homework in advance of this meeting and put together some ideas to review them with you. Now, here's where the power comes in. But before I just start tossing out ideas, can I first ask, what would you like to accomplish in this meeting? Wow! How different is that? What would you like to accomplish in this meeting? Instead of saying, thanks for coming on board, I got the PowerPoint thing all set up, here we go, ready, strap in, let's rock and roll! He says, before I run into any of this stuff, what do you want to accomplish with this meeting? What I visualize is keep the briefcase at your leg, keep it down below, shut the thing. The only thing you need to have is a notebook and a pen ready. Consider that term noteworthy, what they say. Most prospects and customers appreciate when you ask for input before just proceeding with your own agenda in the meeting. It shows respect, shows that their opinion counts, and that simple technique of asking for their involvement will instantly increase the effectiveness of a smaller presentation. Now, he goes on with larger audiences. He says, first of all, it's important to be introduced by somebody from the client company. So if you're going to meet with several decision makers in a boardroom type of environment, then the person that you've been setting that meeting up with, the person you've had preliminary conversations with, needs to introduce you. And don't assume that they're going to, number one. And number two, don't assume that they're going to know how to, even if they're going to. So they might need a little bit of coaching and so forth. You might ask them, do you mind kicking off the meeting with a brief introduction to make sure everyone knows why I'm here and who I am? And besides introducing you as a presenter, you might even ask them to introduce members of the audience. Now, what happens there is you're going to get some kind of valuable insight as to who the decision makers are, where the biases fall, and different things like that. You're going to find out if you got influencers in the room or possible adversaries in the room. So pay close attention. There's politics that can come out when he starts introducing who's who. And he goes on to say he starts by thanking the audience for their time, and then he introduces himself and gives a brief summary of the events that lead up to the meeting. When possible, he references conversations that they've had with key people in the account and so on and so on. Basically, laying the groundwork for here's who I am, here's what I've talked to, here's how I know your business, here's who I've talked to in your business. So you're not just saying, here's a salesperson trying to shove something down your throat. No, this is a guy who's already done some work. And then he goes on, and he starts the presentation kind of after, or he rolls into the presentation like this. He says, okay, so there are a couple of options for this type of presentation. One is for me, just like everyone else, to deliver the standard corporate sales presentation talking about all the wonderful thing that our product or service does. And here's where the power starts. The other option is to set aside the standard pitch and have a more in-depth conversation about how our product or service might impact your specific environment. So rather than just starting down that preset path and opening up my PowerPoint, let me just throw it out to the group. Would you rather I stay generic with my presentation or get specific to your needs? Wow. Now, who the hell is going to say, no, just keep it generic? And if that's the case, you're probably not in the right room anyway, right? What you're doing is you're creating an interactive setting for your sales presentation, and that's one of the greatest secrets of great presenters. If you involve the audience early, you'll get a big surprise as to how much more receptive all of the people will become. Sales are not a monologue. They're a dialogue. You need to think about that. So I just thought that's a great way to come in and get opened. Here's another, by the way, before we move off this point, another great point to ask in that particular area is, since the last time we met, now assuming this is the second or third call that you made on this company, second or third time you're meeting some of these people, really important qualifying question here is, since the last time we met, has anything changed? Has possibly another competitor come in and given their presentation? Has their budget changed? Has their time frame changed? Instead of coming in and just saying, okay, here we are on my agenda again, what you're doing even on the subsequent calls is you're finding out what theirs are. Let's move on. Number 4, write this in. Their vision needs to become your message. So what happens is most salespeople present a vision of what they are instead of giving the customer a glimpse of what they can be. Most important thing is don't tell the customer what they can be until you find out what they want to be first. So what's our message here? Ask questions and listen. What I want you to do is go through a drill. Put on the buyer's hat and say what could be going on in their environment. Where could their challenges be? Where could their pains be? Where could their fears be? And start listing them. And list how you would ask questions to pull these things out. And then list suggested recommendations for how your product or service could create the solution that they seek. Their vision needs to become your message. So you need to find out, what their vision is. You need to ask questions and listen. It doesn't happen because you want to ask more questions. It doesn't happen just because of the quantity of questions. It happens because you ask relevant questions, and you prepare those questions, and you practice those questions, and you come up with 3 to 4 ways to ask each one of those questions. Here's another tip for you. If you have the opportunity to do so, do this. Meet or speak with anybody who's going to be in the presentation beforehand. Phone call, meet with them for lunch, just tee it up as a preliminary interview. Just need to find out which direction that they want to go. So if you have the ability to do so, you need to ask each one of them about their concerns, their expectations, and their hopes for the presentation. So here's a few questions you might want to ask. And I understand that I'm giving a lot of information and we're moving fast here, but you're going to get a CD-ROM of this to fill in the notes. Okay, so how do you see our product or service helping your company? Who, in addition to yourself, will this impact? What is the ultimate goal that you're trying to accomplish? Hey, if everything goes as planned with this and we implement this, what do you think the net result will be in 1 year? Will it make your job easier? See, the answers to these questions are going to give you insight as to the main motivations of that particular individual. And then when you give the presentation, you need to speak to those motivations. Again, that goes back to doing your homework, but it comes down to you're finding out what their vision is of where the product can take them. And if they don't know the answers, then you also have a pretty good idea of where you need to go in your presentation. Let's move on. Number 5, write this in. Get them, quote unquote, in the game. Get the customer in the game. As an observer, your interest level is not as high as if you're a participant. It's interesting with these helmet cams and things going on in the NFL now. It gets you right in the game, lets you know what's going on, lets you hear the trash talk that's going on, lets you almost feel that crunch when you're watching football on a Sunday afternoon. And they've got all these games going on, and you get this helmet cam, and you're hearing all the things going on. You're hearing the plays, you're watching what's going on, and all the TV shows that let you in behind the scenes of what. It gets you more engaged into actually watching the game, because you're a participant now, not just an observer from the outside. Customers don't understand an awful lot. You ever walk out of a sale and you say, you know what, they didn't buy it, they just didn't get it. They didn't understand. Now guys, you know what, it's not their job to get it. It's your job to help them understand. It's your job to create a compelling reason based upon their needs, which you discover to do business. They may not understand that they even have a problem. And if they do, how the problem came about. They may not understand what this problem could mean, what it means to them today, and what it means to them in the future. They may not be fully aware of what it costs them today and what it may cost them in the future. And they certainly don't understand how to solve it. And they don't understand what not solving it could mean. We need to not only bring these things and get them out there on the table and discuss them, we need to dollarize them and talk about, well, say we'll continue down our current path and do nothing about this. How much longer will this cost us this and this? And we need to create some fear. We need to get our customers understanding. We need to get them in the game. We need to get them in our head as well. We need to get them running the plays and feeling the pain of the tackle. We need to be the coach. How do we do this? We need to conduct a thorough diagnosis to uncover the problems and expand the customer's awareness of their situation. Once the problem is clearly, think about it like a doctor. Doctor asks questions, does a thorough diagnosis, and starts explaining, here's why you're feeling this pain. Here's what's causing the pain. Here's the treatment path I'm going to take you down, whether that's with narcotics, or whether that's with therapy, or whether that's with exercise, or whether it's surgery, or what have you, so that the customer understands their options. And then, here's all the options. Here's my recommendation as a professional. I've diagnosed. I've given options, and I'm going to give a recommendation. Once the problem is clearly understood and the customer perceives all the ramifications of that problem, not just here's what's caused it so far, here's where you are today, but also here's where you're going to be in the future if you stay on that path, then the salesperson is justified in making that recommendation. And at that point, a presentation really isn't necessary, is it? At that point, we don't have to worry about a pitch. At that point, we don't need to build value. We did that through the diagnosis. Let's move on. Number 6, you need to speak their language. Speak the language of the customer, not your language. You need to stay away from that industry jargon that you have in the four walls of your company. Think about it. If you've gone out to get a mortgage recently or a second on your home, you hear the way the mortgage broker talks. He talks about title and escrow and what a HELOC is. By the way, HELOC, H-E-L-O-C, home equity line of credit, fixed interest rates, variable interest rates, prime interest rates. You know what? Maybe some of you know what all those things mean, but there's a vast majority of customers out there who don't live in that world. So we need to speak the customer's language. How about you folks out there in the computer or the IT industry? IT, what does IT stand for? Maybe sometimes people don't even understand that. That's information technology. They talk about networking and IP addresses and RAM and all these different things. Well, for some of us, that's becoming more common because of the world we live in, but for many of us, it's not. And we can't go running off assuming that they're going to understand what we have. The company that I worked with out in New York, I was talking about these guys, they like to throw around terms like leverage and underperforming assets and so forth. And I came in and I said, what does that mean? As a consultant, sometimes I want to come in and act like the dumbest guy in the room. What does that mean? What does that mean? When you say underperforming asset, what does that mean? Well, I came in some of these group meetings, and I said, leverage. I've heard all of you say, we create leverage. We give you better leverage. I said, do me a favor. Take out a piece of paper, each one of you, and silently and to yourself, write down what you think leverage means. 26 people in the room, 26 different definitions. Now, what are the chances that the customer's going to, if you all work in the same environment, you have 26 different definitions, what do you think the customer has as far as a definition? Probably a different one. You need to speak the customer's language. This is why diagnosis is so important. We need to dumb it down. We need to learn our selling environment so that we become a professional. Learn who it is that we're speaking with. Incidentally, many of us sell at different levels inside of organizations. The the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer, understands financial terminology. Speak his or her language because they're going to speak it and you need to know what they mean, and if you don't, you need to ask. Not because you want to look dumb, but because you want to look concerned that you get it. Okay? If you're talking to someone, you're selling into that IT environment, you need to learn their language so that you can speak it when appropriate, but so that you understand it when they do. You're a professional, damn it. Understand your customer. Harry Truman had a great saying that does not apply to sales. It says, if you can't convince them, then confuse them. That does not relate to sales. But too many of us are out there, and unbeknownst to us, we're confusing our customers because we're using our language and not theirs. So make sure in your presentation you speak their language, not yours. Number 7 says assume nothing. You know that old acronym, when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me as you break down the word assume. Well, you do this in sales every day. Don't understand that your prospects understand the value of your product. Don't assume they understand the application of your product or service. And incidentally, just because you say something, that doesn't mean someone else gets it. You need to be absolutely sure that your prospects fully buy into the power and the value of what you sell and that they understand it completely. So, what does quality mean when you say it? What does it mean? Can you answer that? What does quality mean? It says if it means that we break down less, well, now you're starting to take me towards something that means something for the customer. Don't assume that they're going to bridge the gap from you saying we are high quality to the benefit of so you'll have peace of mind that your machinery stays up. They don't bridge that gap. Don't assume that they will. There's too many sales hacks out there who stop at saying we have quality, we have service. You know, when somebody says one of the things we pride ourselves on is great service, God, if they stop there, they've thrown themselves in a bucket with everybody else. So if they were to continue and say, so I'm sure I'm not the first salesperson to say that service is their hallmark. Let me explain what service means to us. And furthermore, if you could design, let's say I'm a cable service provider. So if you could define the service standards for a cable company, Mr. Customer, what would the most important three things be? And shut your mouth and listen to the customer, and they'll tell you how to sell them. So you always want to be checking in with your customer. As you're giving your presentation, I want you to ask questions like this. So how's that look so far? Does that make sense? Okay, so we're on track here. Do you understand what I mean by that? You want to issue these recap statements. Give you an example. Recap statements that clearly communicate your understanding of what you heard from them, by the way. Don't assume that you knew what they meant. So what I hear you telling me, Mr. Customer, is this. Is that correct? What I'm hearing you say is that this is how much money you've lost, and so on and so on and so on. We need to put together a program that's going to do this, this, and this so that you can receive the benefit, which is this. Now, is that correct? Don't assume. Now, on another side of a coin, don't predetermine where their biases are going to be. Guys, as salespeople out here, we hear objections. You know, we get kicked around. We get beat up. And one thing I've found with a lot of salespeople is that they tend to tee up objections that aren't really there. They learn, you know, a customer may be very, very interested, and they say, now, you may think that this is what we do. And, no, wait a minute. Don't tell the customer what they may think. There's a big difference between objection avoidance by pre-addressing them in advance or teeing them up. So we got to be careful. We're not assuming anything. In the sales process, we need to be prepared for everything, but assuming nothing. Number 8 says, tell me a story. Write that down. Tell me a story. We find that the best salespeople, and typically the most seasoned veteran salespeople, tell using success stories of other customers. And I have to tell you, this could be one of the most single powerful elements in your presentation philosophy. We call it building the 3P SSG. That's the third-party success story guide. We want to talk about the successes that our other customers have had. We want to share the wins. We want to identify the stories that can relate to where the customer is. Don't tell a story about some big financial windfall that some guy got through real estate when you're dealing with a small mom and pop laundromat over here. You need to tell a story that relates to the small mom and pop laundromat. You need to put a name and a face to the claims that you're making by telling stories. The whole philosophy behind this is, listen, I don't have to tell you how good it'll be for you. I'll tell you what it did for them. I'll let you draw the bridge. They'll start saying, I want some of that. Make sure that when you tell your stories, make them as specific as you can without bearing the soul of all of your other customers. If it's a customer that's in a competing industry, do not share their industry secrets. They've placed their confidence in you. Don't share those. So if it is a competing company, just keep it a little bit off the deck. What do I mean by that? Well, let me see if I can share a story with you, Mr. Customer. There's a company that we do business with that's in your space that, quite frankly, is a competitor of yours that's been using our product for X amount of time, and they've applied it this way. And these are some of the things they've gotten out of it. Initially, they felt that the cost of the product was a bit outside of their comfort zone. But initially taking the leap of faith, what they've received as far as a benefit of bing, 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 bing. Now I'm sharing a story that does a couple things. Number one, it's telling the customer it's okay to feel the way that you feel because other people have felt that way just like you. Secondly, I'm dropping a name if I can use the name. And if not, I'm saying we do business in your industry, in your space. Tell the story. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to sit down and I want you to identify what are the main roadblocks you run into, the main objections, the main concerns that customers have. And I want you to start telling stories. Some of the main benefits that your product or service can bring to the customer. I want you to identify objections on one side and benefits on the other side. Not features, benefits. Here's what the customer gets for owning my product, not what my product has. Okay? Now, next to each one of those objections, I want you to write a story. It's a paragraph of a customer who initially had that same objection, but now is a long-term customer of yours, and then the benefit that they received because of it. And on the benefit side, you want to talk about reliability being your hallmark, or your service being your hallmark. Then tell a story as it relates to over-the-top customer service. Let me give you an example. Customer may ask a question. What questions could come out that you could answer with a story? That's a great question. Rather than just give you an answer, give you some claim, let me tell you how we've solved that for somebody else. Now, here's an important point you need to know about this. Those stories will not always come to you at the moment that you need them. So you need to get them out of your head and onto paper. And then you need to get them on that, from that paper back into your head by repetition and practice of telling the story. For you more junior salespeople out there who don't have these stories, you need to ask your colleagues. You need to ask the more senior people, hey, have you ever run across this? What kind of story would you tell? Hey, have you ever run across this? What kind of story would you tell? Hey, I'm getting my ass kicked by price objection. You got any customers in your book of business that are doing business with you now, but at first said your prices are too high? Build your own 3P SSG. Build your own success story guide and share those, integrate those stories over and over and over into your presentation. The benefit? Your customer will have confidence in you, greater level of confidence in you, that you've not only been doing this for a while, but that you've solved problems that are similar to theirs. Let's move on. Number 9, repetition of the main message. Repetition of the main message. You need to make sure that you're figuring out the key message that you really want to deliver to your customer based upon the diagnosis that you've done. Let's assume and go back and say I'm the doctor again. And the big issue that the person had was quality of life. You need to figure out the main issue, and you need to weave that in several times throughout your presentation. Okay, think about Martin Luther King. I have a dream today. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream today. I have a dream. He went over and over and over, and that was his theme. And he's well known as being one of the greatest speeches of all time, and it's called I Have a Dream speech. That's what they wanted him to remember. He wanted people to remember he had a dream. It was about the content, about how the nation could be better and so forth. So what's the main message? You need to tie in their needs to your offer over and over and over. So what is that main message? Maybe it's increased profit. Maybe it's minimizing their risk. Maybe it's improving their cash flow, helping them be more successful, increasing productivity, bringing in more customers, enhancing their image. You need to paint the picture of where they will be. And remember, if you put several coats of paint on the picture, it's going to increase the clarity of the picture. The more paint that's up there, the less vague it becomes, the more vivid it becomes, and then your solution becomes evident. Now be careful with this, that you don't put too many benefits in. That comes back to feature dumping. You're just saying, here's, matter of fact, the fewer benefits you focus on, the better. Because if you're saying something that doesn't mean anything to the customer, you're talking about a benefit that they do not seek, what you're doing is you're upselling. What you're saying is, I didn't listen to what's most important to you. I'm focused on what's most important to me. And then you confuse them. And a confused mind always says no. Focus on the main benefit that they've identified, and don't try to sell them everything. Let them buy what they want. So when you repeat the main message, you begin with the message, you tie it in throughout the presentation, and you end with it. And number 10, our 10th strategy or tactic, the top sales pros as it relates to sales presentation, is always, before you end your presentation, always identify the next steps. It's part of your presentation. Your presentation is not show and tell. Presentation is the entire process from when you walk through the door to when you walk out the door. I learned something from a colleague of mine years ago. He said, if you cannot close the deal at this meeting, you close the next meeting at this meeting. What he meant was, you don't walk out without some agreement on the next steps. Could be the next meeting, could be other decision makers being brought into the process, it could be a proposal that needs to be sent, it could be pricing that needs to be given, although be careful with pricing. It could be documentation of claims you've made, it might be an email, it might be a phone call. What action steps are next? Always ask what the next steps will be and never leave without ascertaining the exact procedures that will occur following your meeting. Again, whether it's a date for a decision, subsequent meetings, or additional information that may be required, be sure you know and they know exactly what to expect and to provide. You are the quarterback of the presentation. You call the plays. You're not just some other observer or participant in there. You're the captain. You call the plays. And I'm going to give you a bonus one. You can write in there at the bottom on number 10. And you've heard me say this before. Listen, guys. Have fun. Be yourself. If you want to persuade people, which is what a presentation is designed to do, you first got to connect with them on a personal note. Have fun. Have a conversation, not an interrogation. When I talk about asking questions, I'm not talking about going in there and interrogating the hell out of somebody. Have some fun with it. Get to know them. Set your dang presentation materials and collateral materials aside and go in and open a customer based upon who you are and who they are, rather than trying to close them based on what you have and what it does. Have fun. Be yourself. Understand you're in the no business. You take no's, you're going to get some no's. You need to be prepared, but you don't always have to be canned and rigid. You need to have fun. One other further bonus there is always make sure when you're giving a presentation, you're presenting price to those who can cut the check, and only after you've established value from their perspective. You never quote price until you establish value, and you don't worry about pricing with people who can't write the check. So in closing, I want you to remember, presentation is showtime. But you need to understand one thing. Even Broadway shows require preparation, rehearsal, detail, and planning. Preparation, rehearsal, detail, and planning, just like your sales presentations. You're not going to suddenly rise to the occasion and make a great presentation without preparation, rehearsal, detail, and planning. You want to know the good news is you'll have to make less presentations if you follow this format. You'll make less presentations if you use these strategies and tactics. Why? Because your closing rate will go up because you're going to do a better job opening your customer. A fantastic presentation is a function of lots of things. It's a function of pre-call planning, asking the right questions, listening, and understanding the answers that your prospects provide. It's also good, solid product knowledge and a practice, professional delivery, effective sales tools that you use correct, qualified, receptive prospects, making sure you're in the right place at the right time in front of the right people with the right message, with the right set of ears, with the right questions to tee up the things you need to hear. All of these things are part of the presentation. It's all part of the process. You think back to all of my Sales Mastery Top 10 Tactics teleseminars. We go into questioning. We go into listening. We go into lead generation through networking, referral generation. We go into how to get through the gatekeeper in the first place, because many of you are saying, hey, I don't have a problem with my presentation. I just don't get in front of enough people. Well, it doesn't matter then. Doesn't matter how many times you use these tactics. If you're not in front of the right people, if you don't work on your weakness areas, like getting through the gatekeeper, leaving the right voicemails to get some calls returned, prospecting, lead generation. Incidentally, the next teleseminar, September 29th, is the top 10 lead generation tactics of the top sales pros. If you can't get in the door, it doesn't matter how good your message is. So you need to focus on those things. I've got price negotiation. I've got closing. All of these things have been teleseminars in the past, all of which are CDs that are available through my office. All of them, with the handouts just like today's. Folks, I'm going to wish you the absolute best of selling, but wishing doesn't get it done. All the things that we talked about today, they are a good start to getting things done. And if you're having challenges in any of the areas that I just mentioned, please call my office. Let's walk you through the right diagnosis. Let's find out what would be the right program for you to get involved with so that you increase your efficiency, your effectiveness, your productivity, and your success every day. Folks, thanks for tuning in. Make it an awesome, awesome selling week. And remember, September 29th, lead generation. We'll talk to you then.